Dear friends, thank you for the invitation, for the hospitality, but mostly for the courtesy of allowing me to address you even with the late arrival, which I can assure you is, as they said in that famous French movie, is beyond my control. It was a big storm in Washington and I could not then connect. But then let me just go through the fundamentals of my commentary rather than through all of it. We, with Wolfgang, as he was leaving, he said, I think I already heard your commentary about investment in Washington. And effectively, he did. We were with the G20 grouping in Washington, talking about 3 I's, investment, innovation, but also implementation. This is the Turkish 3I approach. And in June, we will have our ministerial council meeting where the German delegation is going to be led by Sigmar Gabriel. And there, the main theme is investment. And as Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who is going to be chairing the meeting, likes to say, it's going to be about investment, and it's going to be about investment, and then guess about the third name. He said, well, yes, investment also. So it's investment, investment, investment. Therefore, very, very important and very appropriate that you are discussing about investment in Europe and then about investment in Germany, because to a very great extent, everybody takes Germany for granted. They all say Germany is doing very well. Germany has a very low unemployment level. Germany is the powerhouse of Europe, and therefore nobody looks at what Germany could be doing better. There's nothing terribly wrong with Germany. The only question is, how could Germany be doing better for its own sake, for Europe's sake, and for the sake of the world? And one of the things that clearly Germany could be doing better is the question of investment. And therefore, this particular meeting, the Fratscher report, is not only timely, it is quite critical in terms of setting the strategy. It's also a moment where global foreign direct investment flows are 40% below their pre-crisis level. Europe, the most affected. The EU inflows of FDI are the ones that are even more affected in terms of how much less foreign direct investment is coming to Europe vis-à-vis the pre-crisis period. Even in Germany, non-residential investment spending remains subdued despite rather favorable funding conditions. If you think about it, funding conditions have never really been better, except what is not very clear is the future, the Zukunft. And therefore the question is, what do you do about it? How do you marry very good conditions with the possibility of actually making the investments real? Now, there's also questions that are beyond investment. The Juncker plan, for example, 315 billion, well, it sounds like a lot of money. You divide it by 28 countries, it doesn't sound like such a large amount of money. We like to say that it's an amount of money which is going to look small if we get the regulatory right. If we get the regulations right about telecom and about energy and about electricity, etc., 315 billion is going to be, maybe it can turn into the trillions. And it's going to happen maybe even without a lot of public money. Simply because, but there is no common market about electricity or about telecoms or about, there's no single market or about energy in general. And that is, of course, stopping the flows of investment. Every country is an island, clearly smaller than the potential of the scale that it could have. So one is talking really about a plan where they says the first pillar is the money, and the second pillar is the projects, and the third pillar is the regulation. And I would change it around, and I would say the first pillar is the regulation, and then the money and the projects will come almost naturally. So again, it's a question of how do you create the conditions for investment. There are questions of governance, of course, and there are questions of productivity in a number of areas, because when you invest, you take a look, well, broader framework, the country. Does it have good macroeconomics, more stability, et cetera, and then the sector. Is the sector the right sector, but is the sector well regulated? Is the sector well managed? Does the sector have a future? And third, the project. Then the project itself. And then you get into how you're going to finance it. Here I have to say one of the key elements, and that is something Germany is putting on very appropriately. Industrie 4.0 looks not only like the way to go, but an indispensable key to the success of any launch of an investment plan. So I talked about some of the I's. Let me quote Wolfgang, who just left. He may have said this here, but in Washington he said, it's very fine to talk about investment and very fine to talk about monetary policies, zero interest rates. Mario Draghi, you know, going in there says, it's very nice to talk about fiscal. What can we do? Well, we're all trying to retrench from spending, from deficits and from debt, etc. So it does not look like there's a very great promise in public spending. Therefore, it's almost a cliche that we have to bring in the private sector in order to do the investments, etc. But at the same time, clearly, this is not going to happen if we have a combination of monetary policy, fiscal policy, and structural change, structural adjustments. So let me refer very briefly to these other I's that have to do with mostly the object of investment. One is, of course, infrastructure, and let me refer particularly to Germany. Here, the deficit is about 0.5 to 1% per year. Just the lower carbon change will require tens of billions per year to the year 2020. And of course, this is the year of COP21 in Paris. Therefore, these questions have to be addressed. Everybody is looking at Germany and how it's going to make a transition to move away from the nuclear, move into renewables. People are admiring the fact that you are about 27, close to 30% of renewables in a very short period of time. This offers enormous possibilities for investment, but also very challenging in terms of the financial needs and the coordination and the focus on the sectors. There's also the question about transport infrastructure, while improving priority setting, cost-benefit analysis of infrastructure projects. Again, things like digital infrastructure, broadband, and again, the Industrie 4.0, because Germany is moving into a higher and higher value-added economy. Its manufacturing is not going to be abandoned. We're not going to change from manufacturing to services overnight. It's just that the manufacturing exports of Germany now are about 50% made of services. You no longer export cars, you export code with wheels. And this is more and more the kind of exports that this particular country, which is one of the most successful in the world in terms of manufacturer exports, is going to continue to be injecting in order to maintain its edge. So the question of investing in the infrastructure, all types of infrastructure, including the digital, is of very great substance. The second is about innovation, and mostly because this is a way to increase productivity. And this is, here lies, for Germany in particular, a paradox. You have one of the highest productivities for manufacturing, and your services industry is low in productivity. But when you put the two together, if more and more of your exports and manufacturers depend on the services, and the services are not up to speed and just as competitive and just as productive as the manufacturing, then the services can become a drag on the success to maintain your edge in manufacturing. So that's something, of course, we have to avoid at all costs. We have to catch up the services and do the innovation as a very important structural reform. And of course, part of the innovation comes from the fact that you have a more competitive ambiance, where you have more players in the field, and therefore where innovation comes, because innovation mostly comes from the companies. In our more or less average, let's say, successful model of innovation, of R&D investment, 2/3 comes from the private sector and about 1/3 from the public sector. And Germany does its bit on the public sector. Clearly, the private sector has to invest more here. The third is what I call the investment, the eye of inclusive growth. So you have the eye in the investment in infrastructure, the investment in innovation, but the investment is inclusive growth. And this is about not just social justice or equality. It has to do with economics. It has to do with finance. It has to do with productivity. It has to do with skills. Skills, skills, skills. And skills is a combination of education, innovation, labor markets, vocational training, and the lifelong learning. Now, Germany is the place to go when you want to learn apprenticeships and the things that, and there was almost an industry. Your tourism has benefited from the fact that everybody wanted to come during the crisis to see how the Germans do it. How do you do what? Well, why do they have such a low unemployment? Why are they below the crisis unemployment levels? And why they never really got very high. And how did they do it? Why was it possible? Well, clearly there's a rather unique combination of factors between the private sector, between the unions, between the governments, between the individuals themselves. But it is clearly something that has to be evolving constantly in order to continue to be effective and efficient. Unlike Sweden, the Netherlands, the United States, Germany still invests less in knowledge-based capital than in physical capital. All these other countries I mentioned invest now more on knowledge-based capital than on physical capital. Clearly it has to do with your own manufacturing base, but clearly it has to be looked at hard in terms of maintaining the edge. And as I said, it's not just about education. Germany comes out in our PISA standardized tests, but the question is, it's about skills, which is not necessarily the same as education. And then the other one is about investment I for institutions, another important I. Members are increasingly involved in bilateral and regional trade and investment liberalization initiatives. There's a TTIP. There are, of course, others like the TPP, etc. For you, the relevant one is the TTIP, with all the tariffs restructuring, with all the elimination of behind the border barriers, and of course, what we would call the liberalization of trade, which does not require, the old-fashioned way is you liberalize televisions, I liberalize computers, you liberalize shoes, I liberalize textiles, etc. And now we know, because of the work in global value chains and the way global value chains are structured, now we know, because of the value added is the key. It's not nominal trade, it's the value added trade. Who keeps the value added at the end? And that requires, of course, an increasing part of knowledge in the products. And therefore, almost unilateral disarmament, you know. Some countries, the ones that are more aggressive, the ones that are more modern, the ones that are gaining more ground in terms of their market share, are the ones who said, I don't really need reciprocity. What I need is access, and I need also to be competitive. Therefore, I reduce my tariffs so that I can import at the cheapest possible price, so that I can re-export at the cheapest possible price, instead of making it expensive both ways. And that is a completely new approach. We have what I call, we have decoded the trade genome at the OECD with the global value chains, with the trade and value added, with the services trade restrictiveness index, with the trade facilitation diagnosis that we do. And these are the new approaches. And they all are directly related to investment, because all will allow investment to happen. So in the end, what we have, Mr. Vice Chancellor and ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Heimsoth, what we have is, when we look at investment, we look as if investment would have a life of its own and like a panacea. You rub a little bit of investment on everything, you know, and all the pain will go, and all the headaches will go, and all the... it's not the case. Actually, what you have to do is make everything else possible, so that then investment will be a natural result. Investment will happen. Investment will be produced if the framework conditions are there. Let me just share with you, to close, of course, the fact that, again, we are here celebrating the success of a country. We are here celebrating the success of Germany in the worst crisis that we have lived in our lifetimes. Simple as that. And at the same time, we are here looking at how Germany can do better. Better, as I said before, for itself, for Europe, and for the rest of the world. Clearly, investment plays a critical role. And some of these eyes, the ones we're doing with the G20, and the ones we are going to be discussing at the ministerial meeting next June, and these eyes about infrastructure and about innovation and about institutions and others, these eyes all have to be reviewed, all have to be taken care of, all have to be addressed, all have to be benchmarked, all have to be compared. Best practices have to be defined, and that is what we do at the OECD. So count on us. Feel comfortable with us in the efforts going forward. And congratulations to the Vice Chancellor for the initiative to commission this study. Second, for the quality and the findings of the study. Just the fact that 2/3 of the key are with subnational authorities, for example, is dramatic, because it then puts a focus where the focus should be. One tends to take these things at the very cosmic level. You know, it's to say, well, the secrets are the subnational level, 2/3 of it. Just that, you know, and looking at that and how we can actually go to the subnational level to detonate the investments there, because the framework conditions apply to the subnational levels just the same. So thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for your courtesy of holding, and last but not least, for listening. Thank you.